Welcome to the Twinkle Talks EYFS podcast. Working in the early years is busy, funny, messy, and exhausting. Join me, Shána, some of the Twinkle EYFS team, special guest speakers, and other early years practitioners as we talk honestly about our experiences. Whether you're listening for CPD, on your commute, or to help you relax, Twinkle EYFS will share everything you need to know about all things early years. Hello, lovely listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Twinkle Talks EYFS podcast with me, Shána. I'm really excited to bring this episode to you today. We have got some wonderful guests. Emma Fitzgerald, who you might have heard on another episode, who is the Twinkle educational content lead for our originals storybooks aimed at early years children. And we have Pete Lambden, who at the time of recording was the Twinkle's educational content lead for the digital storybook app. And it's a really interesting conversation, which I am sure is happening in not just early years classrooms and settings, but educational settings across the UK. Do screens ruin reading? Well, I think we've got two of the best people to answer that question. So let's jump straight in. Hello, lovely guests. Thank you for joining me today. I'm very excited about this debate that we're going to be having. Before we even get started, please introduce yourselves to our lovely listeners so we know who we're talking to.
Hello, I'm Emma Fitzgerald. I work at Twinkle currently. I make picture books for early years and Key Stage 1 children, so children who are 0 to 7 years old. And I'm here with Pete.
Hi, I'm Pete Lambden. So I do a very similar job to Emma, but making the novels that we call longer stories for children generally 7 to 11. And that's me.
So, in general, we're talking about screens and the progress of reading. Obviously, I've got a special heart for early years, and that's our focus because that's where we begin that journey. Hot topic title: Screens ruining reading. Like, what a way to open. What side are you guys on?
I am traditionally, an early years educator. So I'm more interested, I suppose, in this debate, in the early years side of things. And I'm pretty confident that we might find that for young children, screens aren't ideal for developing good readers and strong communicators. So I'm leaning on the side of print.
That is a statement and a half, Pete. What do you say to that?
Well, I suppose I'll come back with the opposite. I'm going to make the case here that digital screens are, when it comes to reading, are misunderstood quite heavily. And although Emma's gone away and made a lot of notes prior to this and a lot of research, I do feel like I can stand up and make the case for screens.
And you know what? An interesting question would be, how did you get that research, Emma? Was it printed books or was it digital?
I spent the last 2 years in the library, Shána.
Did you?
The internet library.
Of course you did. There we go. So great start.
But do you know what? I did wish I had an actual library because, you know, when you're at uni and like they tell you you can access all these academic journals and you're like, sure, sounds good. Now, I wish I could access academic journals. I didn't know how lucky I was to have a library, what's the word? A student library. So if you're listening and you're young, get in there. Read all the academic journals.
Why do you think then, Emma, so strongly that screens are bad for the reading process and our readers?
Okay, well, that is a good question. And I think that a lot of people at the moment do just say screens are bad. And we just sort of go, yeah, that sounds right. And it does sound right. It does feel like they probably are. But I did actually look into it and try and answer like, are they bad? Or is that just a feeling that people have based on sort of nothing? I will just caveat this as well by saying that one thing that I think I've seen a lot of in journalism, well, I say journalism, often those kind of opinion piece journalisms where it's like, I think this. and then that's that they kind of say whatever they want. I've seen a lot of those kind of articles where the opinion is just screens are ruining children, or our children don't know anything anymore and I know why, and it's screens. And they don't really back it up with much, but it sounds true. And then I think that then just increases because someone else sees it and then they refer to that and someone else goes, well, that person said it, so it must be true. But I wanted to actually try and find some evidence to support our intuitive feeling that maybe they're bad for our children, and maybe for us also. So I did have a little look, and yes, they're bad. Over to
You
you,
are like
Pete.
not on the fence. Yeah, this is hard hitting stuff.
Yeah, no, okay, I'll elaborate if I must. You know, you're twisting my arm. I'll go on. So yes, according to a little doctor I found, I don't know if they're little, they might be medium sized. A doctor called Sina Janidi or Janidi. I apologize to that doctor if I'm not quite sure on the pronunciation. They found that screen time negatively impacts our working memory, our processing speed, our attention, language, and executive function. So
Whoa.
just to relate that back to reading, yeah, we basically need all of those for reading, definitely. You can't really read if you don't have those things. And I suppose it impacts other areas of our life, but for reading, that sounds very compelling. If our screens are negatively impacting all of those things, ugh, that sounds bad, doesn't it? Interestingly, the UK government, their answer to that is kind of, "Ugh, there are a lot of screens and they might be bad, so we need to teach children more media literacy."
Okay.
Maybe that's part of it, but is it just actually we need to just be doing something more dramatic than that and having less screens? I don't know. Another thing that I found for learning, so if we're thinking about reading, but I also think it applies generally to when we're wanting children to learn, is that when we're on a digital device, if we're getting a digital distraction, so that could be like a little push notification comes up.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe someone's poked your sheep on Facebook. That might I might be showing my age there, but those little you're in the middle of something, a little ping comes up.
Yeah. Or an advert stops you halfway.
A little advert comes up, you gotta press the cross, you gotta wait 5 seconds. Those kind of things, those digital distractions can take children up to 20 minutes to refocus afterwards. So even if they
Whoa.
go back to the task, they're not focused on the task for up to 20 minutes afterwards. So in terms of allowing them to focus on reading or whatever. And if you're reading unfocused for 20 minutes, that's not good reading. You're not processing that. You're probably not remembering it. You're not taking it in. You're not understanding it probably. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think I'm the same. Sometimes you're on your phone and you're supposed to be buying your mum a Mother's Day present or whatever it is, and then just as a random example of something that may have happened to someone last night, and
Uh-huh.
then you get a ping of your Instagram, you go on there, you watch 72 reels, you go
Mm,
to bed, and then you wake up and you think, "Oh, what happened to that thing I was doing?" And you've
yeah.
just, you've got distracted. But also, I suppose, just the more creative side of me as well, was really interested in this study that the University of York did, that found that screen time, and I would say general screen time, not necessarily digital reading, but screen time can negatively impact our ability to imagine. Oh, and I thought that was just heartbreaking. We want our
Whoa.
children to be able to imagine, don't we?
But see, I struggle with that because I am a massive Disney fan, Emma, okay?
Mm.
And I'm obsessed as an adult still with all of the films. And it was the films of Disney that gave me my imagination, I would say. It was, yes, of course, I loved reading and things, but those magical fairy tale stories, seeing it in color, watching the pictures move and come to life, and hearing the voices, it blew my imagination away.
It blew it away,
No, no,
exactly.
no,
So
no.
we're on the same
Oh,
page.
darn it. You got me. You got me.
No, and I think there is also another point to be made there, that, like, actually with imagination, you can't imagine something you've not seen. So if you try and imagine an alien or a monster, we usually just take the things we've already seen in life and put them together in an interesting way. So you can't actually imagine anything that's completely unseen. So if you
Wow.
imagine a monster, you imagine probably one with like a dog's ears and then like a unicorn horn and I don't know, a panda's tail or something. You can't imagine something that's not just picking from things you already have thought of.
Interesting.
But having said that, the reason that screen time does impact our imagination is because it can be very passive. So I think maybe we are talking about
Right.
a particular kind of screen time, but we sit there and stuff is shown to us, and we're using usually our 2 senses, and we're not having to generate anything in the same way that if you're reading a novel, you would have to, well, we're probably talking about older children now. If you're reading a novel, then you're having to read that sentence and then use your brain to, yes, use what you've seen before in life, but to generate, what does that person look like? What does a haunted house look like? How does it feel? And if we're more often than reading, we're sort of passively getting images just thrown at us, or moving images, videos, we lose the ability to do that, or at least to do it as quickly. And what they were suggesting in this university study is that it's not so much to do with screens versus books, I suppose. I will concede this. It was more to do with the fact that when we spend a lot of time on screens, we're not experiencing the rest of the world. So we're
Okay.
not experiencing as many things that we touch, that we smell, that we
Mm.
hear. We're just missing out on more of life, I suppose. So that isn't necessarily saying books are better than screens, but just screens versus everything.
Mm.
Screens, if we're just doing screens too disproportionately, yes, compared to living our lives, that's not good.
Ah, it's just like a balanced diet, isn't it, Pete?
That's the point I think I'd pick up here, is that I feel a lot like perhaps that argument you just made is an argument against screen behavior.
Yeah, Emma.
I
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't know if that can. So let's narrow this down to ebooks. So sitting up late at night, pop ups coming up. Now that's because the way that screen is configured, or the way you are interacting, is allowing pop-ups, is allowing you to kind of like scrolling is what that's designed to make you want to do more. So I think
Mm.
the thing to bear in mind here is that screens can be good when done right.
Mhm.
And the thing to think about, I think, is there's an element here of a tide that we cannot stop, because as teachers right now, we're in a really interesting position. We are teaching the first generation to have been born with screens, to have every second in their life had a screen at arm's reach connected to the internet. And so to an extent, it's here to stay. So what do we do?
I agree. Like, we can't fight it, Emma. Like, we're surrounded by digital stuff. You gotta embrace it, girl. Go, Pete, go.
And there's a lot to suggest that people do see screens as a good thing. So there was a study. So the 81% of children, 84% of parents identify positive benefits of being online. That comes from a report from Ofcom in 2023. So I think what that highlights is the embedding of screens. So my point here would be, what we need to do is understand that we need to design books and educate children in reading on a screen, and provide them with an app that maybe doesn't allow pop-ups, or so it's more taking that approach rather than just saying, I think we need to just jettison screens completely.
So it's bad screens that are bad.
Bad screens bad, good screens good.
Oh, I like that. And it's all about how you use them. Okay, so if we narrow it down a bit then, in terms of maybe printed books, physical books versus digital books, ebooks, stuff like that. I mean, there's got to be pros and cons to both, but what does the data say for children in terms of printed books versus reading books? Is there anything?
Where do I start?
Oh,
Um, there are, it won't, it unsurprisingly, there are loads of studies about this. And what was really interesting when I was looking at this is that there were studies on this started as early as the 80s, which I was really surprised about, because I felt like this was quite a modern concern. But I suppose as soon as we've had the ability to have text on screens,
mm,
people have been asking these questions. And some of the earlier studies, let me just try and find them. They were published in the 80s. Sorry, let me come back to that. But the general theme of some of the earlier ones was that they didn't find much difference. But then I reflect on, what did computers look like in
yes.
in the 80s? They were much more just words on a screen, whereas I think now we're talking about computers and screens that can do so much. They're so much more stimulating. And I think that, I suppose, comes back to what Pete was just quite rightly saying, that it isn't necessarily about the fact that the words are in a screen. It's all the other things that come with the screens that we use. So there is some suggestion that maybe when we're just talking about text on a screen in a well-designed ebook, it might not be so bad. Having said that, more recently, there have been lots of studies on this, and there was a lovely meta-analysis of 17 studies. So I didn't have to read all 17. Thank you to Yiran Kong and Young Sixio and Ling Zhe, who had a look at all of those and did the analysis for me. But they looked through all these different studies, and they found that, yes, when comparing reading screen to reading on paper is better than reading on screen for comprehension, but
But why?
it's not significantly different in
Oh.
terms of speed. And I thought that was interesting. They did say that quite possibly the advantage of reading on paper could be accounted for by readers' extensive experience of reading on paper. But then what we're saying is, if we're talking about young children, that isn't necessarily true, is it? Because they've actually got extensive experience of reading on the old tablets. So um,
Mm.
I don't know. So one thing I thought that was also interesting was that there's it, get ready, guys, because it gets really technical here. But it doesn't just affect their comprehension; it affects their meta comprehension, and that's their awareness of what they're aware of. So almost their understanding of their own understanding.
Whoa.
Ugh, what? So they're not aware when they're reading worse, that they're reading worse. And I thought that was really interesting. And do you want to know what the suggested reason for that is?
Go on.
Because when we're on screens, we haven't sort of settled in to read purposefully, mindfully. We haven't carved out time to read often. And I know I do this. If I'm reading, it's often because, oh, it's 7 minutes till the bus and I pull up a Guardian article, or other newspapers are available, whatever, or someone sent you something on WhatsApp and you read it. You're not almost not entering a reading zone,
I
and because
see.
it's so constant, there's so much digital reading to be done, it's almost like we see it as a throwaway task, and we almost don't ascribe enough concentration to it. We see it as easier than proper reading. We don't put as much effort in, and then we don't realize that we're not doing it very well, which I thought was fascinating. I don't know if you can see that in yourself.
You know, when you say that, it's interesting because it's almost like a mindfulness practice, being present in the process of reading, isn't it?
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, often when I love a good book, I'm a bit of I love reading. So I'll often get me a cuppa, get me a brew, get me a blanket, get me egg chair, you know, properly like this little ritual, and open the book and sniff the book because
mm,
sniffing books is wonderful. But
mhm.
you're right, I don't do that with an email. I don't do that with, oh, I've got to do some research for work, and you know, I don't do that. You're right. I just sort of mindlessly do it as a task. Interesting.
I would say it's possibly more nuanced as well, though, in that I mean, I when I lived in London, and I'm old enough to have you know lived before screens in this way. And I used to carry a book round in London when I used to take the tube. And I would say what you've just described there, Emma, you would do with a physical book too. So I'd be sitting on the tube. I wouldn't be fully invested because, let's face it, I'm on the tube in London and
Mhm.
there's things to be aware of. So again, I would just perhaps jump in with that idea that is that more behaviour than
Ah.
necessarily a print versus screen thing.
And also everyone loves a Kindle. Am I allowed to say Kindle? Oh, well, I've said it now.
Other e-readers are available.
That's the one. You know, and that actually makes it more accessible for people to read because, like you say, they've got a commute on the way to school or picking up the kids or whatever, and they haven't got enough room for an actual book, but a Kindle, they can have loads on there. So they actually might do it mindfully.
I think as well
Not
is
what the evidence suggests, but go on.
well that's again, this is clutching at something else where there's a bit of research in that it depends on the person and the environment. So the National Literacy Trust done lots of research over the years, but in 2015 they found with one of their studies They ran an intervention with some boys in a primary school. Now this is older children, so I think they were around 8 or 9. But at the end of the intervention, they were better. So children who at the beginning of the intervention had identified themselves as boys that feel that reading is difficult. There was a better improvement in reading skills and attitude to reading in the group who did the intervention on screens.
Oh, wow.
And then anecdotally, a lot of them then went on to suggest that they preferred the screens. There was something more appealing about them. And it was then looked into a little bit further in this same study that perhaps at home there was more access to a screen. It was something, and it goes back to my first point, I suppose. It was something they were interested in because they were familiar with it. Now, I'm guessing here a bit. I'm a bit of conjecture, but perhaps there are children out there who, again, this is their norm. A house full of books, as we just said, snuggling up, smelling the book, has never been known to them, but they possibly do have some positive connections with screens. So just there is research to suggest the opposite as well a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point.
I just wanted to return to what you said about the smell of paper,
Oh, yeah.
Shána, because, I have researched a lot of stuff on the internet, and I was really interested to see there was actually a paper on exactly that. Someone has done a research paper, Jensen, and then Rowe and Blikstad Ballas in a Scandinavian country. This was in 2024, so quite recent. They produced this paper called "The Smell of Paper or the Shine of a Screen: Students' Reading Comprehension, Text Processing, and Attitudes when Reading on Paper and Screen." So they were literally, I think some people have tried to study, particularly more recently, like what specifically is it about the paper versus screen debate or difference that leads to that difference in how we read and how much we take in, and that one of the things they were hypothesizing, like you're saying, is maybe it's the smell of paper. I don't think they necessarily came to an answer to that in their study, but their study, this was very recent, 2024, found that so they monitored eye tracking technology and found that there was more shallow processing going on in their study. And what, again, one interesting thing that you were saying about why do we comprehend less when we're reading, and what they found by tracking these eye movements, and this was 25,000 fixations. I don't know what that means. Was that the number of times the eyes moved? I don't know. I should have looked into what that means. But that's a lot of fixations, whatever they are. But they monitored all of those, and they found that what was happening was that the students were rereading to a significantly larger extent when they were on screen. So they were kind of skimming and then reading more superficially, but then to actually understand, they were going back more often. And their conclusion, well, one of the things that they possibly conclude is that could suggest to us that reading on screen made them poorer readers. They might have been good readers, but the actual something about using the screen made them read worse in that type of situation than they might otherwise.
Very interesting. However, I must be on Pete's side here and counteract you there, Emma.
Mm.
How quickly
What?
were you able to
Not just
find
me.
that?
The study.
Oh,
How
yeah,
quickly
sorry,
were they
no.
able to find it?
Yes, yeah, it's
In
not personal.
in
Like
my book,
that you
in
just
my research
Googled.
book.
Exactly, like, I agree, like, having the physical book, although sometimes I do accidentally zone out when I'm reading a book, and then I get to the end of the page and I'm like, "Wait, what did I just read?" And then I go back. So I don't think that might necessarily be just a screen thing,
Mm.
but it does give you a massive access to a wider, vast range of information that, people might not be able to go to a library or buy the books or have the physical books, right?
Well, and I would say as well that maybe what I'm able to do on my screen, and I think is kind of supporting what they're saying, is like I might be very, very good in this conversation that I'm having with you in skim reading on my screen,
Mm,
superficially looking through to find the thing that we're talking about. But if I had printed all these notes and read them, possibly I
mm.
would have stored that information and wouldn't even need to refer to these notes. How about that? How
Pete,
about that?
get her, Pete. Go on.
Control F. You get that with a screen. Control
Yeah.
F.
But hold on a minute. In the olden days, we would have just had sticky notes. That would have been our control F, eh? I would have just gone back to my little post-it that I'd stuck onto the place I wanted to
Yeah,
go
but
back
then you
to.
got to buy the post-it, then you got to place the post-it, then you got to write on the post-it, then you got to find the post-it.
Post-its are traditionally cheaper than tablets. I would just
For now.
But no,
for now.
good point. I love that. But that actually moves on quite nicely, I think, because we're talking a little bit now about the different ways we can use printed and digital books, right? I'm pretty sure there are going to be quite a few instances, Pete, where digital books are going to be able to do more things that printed books just can't, right?
Absolutely. This is where we've started to explore this, because obviously there's the element of having everything directly on your fingertips, but how that can possibly be of a large benefit for children is this ability to instantly download. So now I do know I've got children of my own who love going into a bookshop and looking around. So I do completely appreciate that. But at the same time, I think it's also very good for them to have the entire world of books ready to go. Okay, let's put to aside that, whether they can access the spending card for these books, but it's all there. So when we're talking like the DFE reading framework, making links to a feast for books and curating and exploring, that is like really easy when you're on a digital. There's other user benefits too. So adjustable font sizes and types. Now that can be very important for a lot of readers. Integrated tools such as dictionaries, and then like we've alluded to a lot already, the ability to understand, moving away from fiction and stuff, but the idea of footnotes, checking your resources, checking your links, that can be very quick and easy on a digital platform. And another thing worth bringing in here is possibly a link to audio and audiobooks, which we might come back to, I suppose, later. But a digital is an excellent way of presenting children with audio, and thinking as well, particularly young children here. Audio, again, I'm going to go back to the National Literacy Trust, a report they've made this year, a report called Children and Young People's Listening in 2024. Now that is packed with a lot of positive findings when it comes to audio, helping children develop a love of reading, which sounds like reading, listening, but a love of story, a love of books, a love of approaching information in that way. So that's definitely a benefit, I think, with digital that it can offer.
Yeah, and you know what? I've been thinking about, obviously, everything that you've said, but the application in the classroom. And I love printed books, but you have to admit, Emma, that digital books are more inclusive. And let me tell you for why. Everything Pete just said, all right, about the features of a digital book, don't flare your nostrils at me, young lady. Just hear me out. Like for children who have dyslexia, right? You can just instantly change the screen color. You can instantly change the font. You can make the font size bigger. For children who might have motor disabilities and motor restraints, they don't have to physically hold the book, turn the page. It's quite intricate and you need dexterity for that. A digital book, you wouldn't need as much. You'd need different hand skills. Audio, for example, for children who maybe are hard of seeing or they have, blindness, they have another way to access the book. I know you're going to come at me with Braille now because I know there are Braille books. Don't give me that smile. But I'm just saying, there's so many more inclusive features of a digital book. Would you agree?
Look, hey, when I was a kid, we had these amazing printed books where you pressed a wee button on the side and you could hear a duck or a doorbell or whatever, and that was good enough for me, Shána. No, look, fair dues. I think anything that we can do to be more inclusive is fantastic. Yeah, I can't really argue with those points, but I will try. I suppose what another way I suppose that I think about inclusion is in breaking down, I suppose, those gaps that we see between the children that have had really positive starts to their education journey or just their general life journey, I suppose. We're both from the early years. We know about the huge gap that we have when
Yeah.
children start school.
Mm.
And in my opinion, like one of the biggest things that impacts them when they start is their language, their access to language, their ability to communicate with
Mm.
their teacher, their peers, to access what we're saying and to make their wants and their needs clear by usually using some sort form of language. And actually, what I think might be happening is that screens are bad for inclusion in that sense. If we're talking about closing that gap, I think that screens are actually sometimes adding to that, because the children that are using screens more, and this is true of whether it's the parent or carer, the adults in the life using screens, or the children actually, the more screen use we have, there tends to be a direct link in the early years between how much language those children are accessing. And that's not necessarily to say that that's the screen's fault, because, well, I mean, I'm going to get into a point which probably is beyond the scope of this podcast at the moment, about poverty and feminism and long working
Mm.
hours and choices our successive governments have made. But it's about how we use screens and why and when we use them, I suppose. I think there are actually some judgmental tones in some of these reports that I didn't like, about this phrase I hate: sticking kids in front of the TV. I'm doing air quotes there for
Mm.
the listener. I hate that, sticking kids in front of the TV, as if we're doing it so carelessly with our children. But why are we, let's say, allowing our children to access TV and screen time? And I think it's often because of real pressures on the modern family to there isn't that time to spend with the children. But what tends to happen anyway is for the children that are experiencing books with their families, they are accessing a really vast number of words, and they're really developing their language, and they are soaring so high above the children that are not reading with their parents or not being read to and are instead engaging with screens. So I would argue that that particular thing, because I think language is the key to so much of children's education,
Yeah.
I would say that that is bad for inclusion. So yes, lots of good things, but also maybe having a negative impact on inclusion.
Interesting. I'm going to throw something at Pete now, because I was thinking as you were saying this, Emma. Yeah, communication and language is massive, especially in early years.
Mm.
And I'm going to say the C word. Since COVID,
Oh God. Okay. Phew.
not coconut. I know you've got a absolute deathly fear of coconut, so I've avoided that.
It's actually
Um,
oranges that are my fruit that I hate, but we can talk about that in another
that is a
podcast.
whole nother episode. Okay, so COVID, and we have seen across the country that when children weren't able to interact with other people, their communication and language has, it has changed. And the measurements in which we use to measure progress for children's communication and language, they're not hitting the typical age-related marks that children used to be. However, during COVID, when everyone was told to stay at home, they weren't able to go to shops to buy books. The only way that they were going to learn communication, learn about stories, reading, writing, literacy, is through digital books. Am I right, Pete?
What, Shána, sorry, before you let Pete speak, I will just remind you of the true heroes of the pandemic for the listener, which were the Amazon delivery guys.
That's true.
You
That's
could
true.
actually get physical books and anything you wanted delivered to your home because of the legends who were doing those deliveries.
Good
But
point. Good point.
apart from that, sorry, go back to your question that was for Pete. I had to interrupt there.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. My only thing I think I could add to that is I what a complex thing that we
Mm,
are as a group, as a society, still not only just beginning to understand their full effects. I would perhaps put in an argument there that it then also goes back to individual situation and ability to interact in that way. Now, some children were incredibly, I'm going to use this term really loosely, but were very lucky in that they had people around when it comes to language development and things like that to interact. But I would say that there were many children out there, and it was either very rarely the fault of the adults either, that they didn't get that chance. I mean, people trying to work and trying to educate and but I do think you've got a point there, Shána, in that without screens, had that, as Emma has called it, the Panny D, happened in the 80s,
Mm.
I think, it would have been interesting to observe this. And I think, okay, yeah, the deliveries aside, perhaps the screens and the ability to get books, the ability to schools to send books via screen was at
Yeah.
least something.
Mm.
And I think that's an interesting angle to go on here as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when I was teaching through the Panny D, and I had my nursery class, and we were made to, obviously, because we still had an obligation to support the children and try and get education and make their life feel as normal as possible, despite everything that was going on. The Rhino Readers Library saved me. Like, I was able to send links to parents to be able to, because they were really worried. They were like, "Oh, we haven't got books at home, or I haven't got time to read because I'm a key worker and I've got to go to, and all of this." But I was able to send them ebooks, and it was a lifesaver.
Yes, I suppose it's no secret that we work at Twinkle, a digital education company, and we saw the most astronomical rise in searches and downloads during the Panny D. And yes, truly, I would say that digital was an educational savior during
Mm.
that time. I was just trying to think in the 80s, what would the equivalent have been? Like Mrs. Eaton, my old teacher, ringing me and
Oh,
asking me to say my ABCs on the telephone? Like, what
Exactly.
could we have
exactly.
done? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly that. And I think as well, I know that I was just thinking about the wider scope here. So say if it was like COVID aside, the skills that you get from, because there's this big thing right in early years, Emma, you'll know about this. There's the pre-reading skills. It's not just reading what's on the paper. It's about like knowing that in English, if that's what you're reading, that's the language you're reading, it goes from left to right. How to hold a book, how to turn the pages, all of this stuff. There's so much more to learning how to read than just literally reading, the letters. So I was wondering, aside from learning to read, what other skills do the printed books and the digital books and the audio books, like, what other benefits do children get from using them?
Well, I've already talked a lot about language development, and I think at the moment, printed books are just much better at developing children's language. And I think that I wouldn't necessarily say we can blame the screen for that, because I think what's going on there is we're more likely to bond with children and have discussion and positive interactions when we're reading a printed book. And I think that's partly because we haven't got those digital distractions, as we were talking about. We're more likely to do that as a shared experience. Screen time is perhaps at the moment, we're more likely for children to use their screens alone than they are to read a paper book alone, very young children. So when they're reading books, it's more likely the adult is reading to them and they're having those positive interactions and they're getting their words. If we there is that can be overcome by just doing those things digitally. So if you only have access to ebooks or maybe an app with books on, for example, then you can achieve the same thing by sitting with your child and having positive interactions about digital books. It's just that we don't at the moment. So at the moment in the studies, those are better for that reason. But I suppose what we were talking about earlier was that the digital is giving us those, it's good for maybe um more surface level reading, I suppose, in studies, like the we're better able to give concrete answers, so kind of that retrieval reading. So if they said, I don't know, what was the name of the main character, after reading digitally, saying, oh, it was John, that kind of thing would be quite simple. But deeper inference is harder, and obviously we want children to be developing those skills. So not just, I don't know, in terms of academic, not just knowing what information was going on, but like being able to infer. And I think that's where we develop empathy through reading, isn't it? We have to be able to think more deeply and infer what characters are thinking and feeling. And at the moment, that is better done through paper books. So in terms of children's social, personal, emotional development, I found that really interesting in the research, that if you want children to be developing those skills, then actually paper is best. Someone called Naomi Barron, who's a professor of cognitive neuroscience, found this, and she referred to more sophisticated deep reading processes. We're better able to discern the truth, which I thought was really interesting.
Wow.
And I know that we do sometimes hear about people being quite easily misled or quite happy to
Mm,
believe things on, I don't know, one of the most popular social media platforms amongst our older generation. It's often a bit of a meme, isn't it, that like boomers believe anything. I use that term, ironically. I
mm,
wouldn't use
mm.
a term to denigrate a generation, but that's what you hear, that boomers believe anything on that social media platform. But I think it's interesting that there's actually, yes, there's a reason that we're doing that. It's because we're reading more superficially, more surface level. We're not doing sophisticated reading, but we're also not using our critical thinking perhaps when we're reading online or screen materials. And she said here, Naomi Barron, that paper books more allow us to appreciate beauty and to reach the knowledge and wisdom necessary to sustain a good society.
Oh,
That's very compelling, isn't it? I want to be in a good society.
oh.
Hmm. Pete, do you not want to be in a good society? Your turn.
I'd love to. I don't think I am. I think this is it, though, isn't it? This is the nub, I think, of what we're getting at here, is that it's both, isn't it?
Mm,
It's absolutely the case that digital has got such an amazing power and potential, but it's got to be handled right.
mm.
And printed books, they're amazing. So I will concede you that.
I thought I'll just go on Pete's side if for a minute, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Um,
I was about to back him up as well, but go on, you first.
well, you know what I said earlier about the imagination
Yeah, I took
and
offense
how
to that.
screens are bad for that. I would say if we're yeah, you did. You thought I was bashing Disney. No shade
Yeah.
on Disney. Other cartoons are available. Uh, I suppose we're talking a lot about screens and we're talking about looking at screens, but I suppose just to shift slightly there into the digital, digital isn't always looking at screens, is it? I think if we're talking about
Mm,
digital, getting access to literacy through digital, I think then that's where maybe we want to come back to audiobooks, because I will concede again that audiobooks are actually that we're not talking about audiobooks when we're talking about digital being bad for our imaginations, because actually audiobooks are very good for that.
yeah.
Um, I think it was again the National Literacy Trust that did this study recently on reading for pleasure, and they actually found that audiobooks were better for
Mm,
reading for pleasure at the moment in our current state of affairs in this country. Children were said they were more likely to read for pleasure using audiobooks than not. So perhaps they're and they one of the reasons they gave for that was that when they're listening to the books instead of looking at them, then they are more able to use their imaginations than they are
mm,
when, if you're looking at a picture book, you are given the image, and that's wonderful. There's lots to talk about. I love picture books. Just to be really clear, I'm not saying to anyone throw your picture books out. Love making picture books. I think they're amazing. But in addition to that, listening to audiobooks I think is fantastic for children, for giving them that opportunity that they're perhaps not getting elsewhere. Oracy, obviously there's a lot of focus at the moment, like if teachers are listening, they're probably hearing that word a lot
mm,
at the moment from their SLT and in, things that are being released by the government. But oracy is a focus. We know that we want children to be making more progress than they are in speaking and listening, and we're increasingly aware of the impact that has on their ability to access education and also like their future life chances, really. And digital audiobooks, yes, I think they contribute to that.
wow.
And they can be, again, like Twinkle, we've got listen and follow. I mean, isn't that a great
Yeah.
example of how these two things are coming together? You can have your picture book or book open in front of you and the audio running as well, reading it to you. So,
And that really supports as well, like I think fluency and pronunciation. And again, if we're talking about how valuable it is for children to hear books being read aloud. If for whatever reason they haven't got access to a parent or carer or adult or older sibling that can do that for them, or perhaps they don't have people in their home that speak English confidently, maybe the child themselves is new to English, using digital to be able to provide that direct reading experience, that reading to them, where, the teacher isn't gonna go home with them. Our government's not gonna provide a lovely assistant to go round every week and help that family with reading aloud in English. That's where digital can provide something that otherwise they just wouldn't be getting potentially.
Yeah, massively. And I was thinking as well, I'm trying to get like some direct comparisons, and it's really difficult, guys. Just, thank you for making this really difficult for me. Like, if we think about your originals books, Emma, I love them. I love getting my delivery. There is just something, isn't it, about receiving that book and having it in your hand and seeing the pictures. But then also I think what you've done really cleverly is you've got the QR code as well, which means that you get sent straight to what Pete said, the audio listen and follow, the ebook, all of the other stuff. But also, Twinkle AR, some of the books you can actually bring the characters to life if you have the physical book. And then
Mhm.
it comes up and it's like the character is in your living room. That is insane.
Yes, and I suppose, I mean, although we have been really battling it out today, I suppose in the ideal world would be digital and print would be happy bedfellows. They would work together.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be either or. I think they can work really well together. And I think a lot of what Pete said, I agree with. It's not what you have, it's how you use it. So, for example, when we were talking about inclusivity and accessibility, printed books, you can get Braille. Yes, you can get bigger books. You can get different, dyslexia font printed books. Digital, you can do all that with a click of a button. When it was in terms of accessibility, you can get digital and it can be sent, you can be downloaded, you can access it. But then, like you said, Emma, there was a study about actual physical books. It might actually even be the smell. It's a multi-sensory approach that printed books can give you that digital can't. There is one thing though that I think might be tricky to differentiate, or shall I say, to have a fair argument about whether digital or printed books are better. And this is a scary word for schools and head teachers, I'm sure. Budgets.
Well, this is where I think digital wins.
Really? I wasn't thinking tablets are expensive, no?
Well, yeah, I suppose I haven't thought of that. But what I was going to come in here with was now I know there's a lot wrong with this idea, but subscription models, but there's also quite a lot right with this idea. And I think for schools, a subscription model to get ebooks onto your tablets is a very cost-effective way of getting a lot of rolling, like ebooks that are changing often, like a library. Now, yeah, there's an okay, yeah, sure, there's an outset of paying for the devices, but once you've got those devices and got a relatively cheap subscription model, you can give children that feast for books, and new books very often.
That's a very good point.
May I talk about phonics?
Oh, go on then.
It's not really my I'm not the lead of phonics, so it's not strictly my business, but I will be generous and give something for Pete's side again here. I did find in my research that someone called Naomi Barron was suggesting that actually digital resources are very good for supporting phonics learning. And I think that's because, what we were talking about, why digital reading can be bad for reading is because of that deeper comprehension we need. But if we're talking about just purely decoding and all the phonics activities you have to do in the early years when you're just looking at k, a, t, the sheer volume of stuff you would need to produce on
Yeah.
paper
Yeah.
in order to provide that the just the quantity of stuff that they need to cover. And I think that the evidence suggests that actually that space is a really good place to use phonics. And I think in terms of your budgets, if you already have all the digital equipment that we're talking about, and you're using it in multiple ways, I suppose, to support reading, once you've got the tablet, you can use it for all these phonics games, phonics assessment, really useful on there. And then you've also got ebook libraries. You can use the Rhino Readers app. And also, I think only recently occurred to me when I saw someone else's, I don't know, TikTok or Instagram video, that you go from the app and you can sort of beam it up onto a screen and share anything
Yeah.
from there. That's such a good idea.
Emma, that's been around for years, Grandma.
Get with the program, Emma.
Well, I knew you could beam things to a screen, but it had never occurred to me, the person who works on originals, to do that with our own app. And I thought, oh,
That's so
that's a good
funny.
idea to
Yeah,
do
I
with the
don't
app,
think it's
isn't it?
called beaming. I think it's called air
What
dropping.
whatever.
Plugged.
uh, you know, science zap, whatever it is that gets it up there. That once you've got the tablet, I think it is probably cheaper than constantly. And I suppose, like Pete said about the feast of books, I think one of the things that their reading framework makes really clear, that yes, you need the classics, you need those very familiar books, those core texts, but you also need to be sort of constantly updating and replenishing
Yeah.
your library, your book corner.
Yeah.
And that's very expensive to do regularly with physical books. Whereas if you've got your tablets already, you've outlaid the cost on your tablets and you can update them, or, someone who runs a wonderful app like Originals is updating them regularly for you. New stuff's just pinging in, isn't it? Out of the internet. Brilliant. You haven't even got to go to the shop. So yes, it's good for that. But if we're talking about budgets, may I talk about Sweden, please?
Of course you can.
So I'll just talk about Sweden. So this is quite recent again. I'm talking about Sweden's very recent sort of their decisions they've made about children's education. So in 2017, the National Agency for Education in Sweden, they introduced a digital strategy that was going to further digitize schools, basically. However, in January 2024, they ruled that their assessments do not no longer support the digitization. They received scientific evidence to suggest that children in primary schools learn best when using a pen and paper. And I think interesting to note there, a lot of the most recent studies that I was looking at were from Scandinavia, Norway, Finland, Sweden, which makes sense that they've then concluded, using the evidence, I guess, from their kind of geographic region, that they'd like to go in a different direction. And so by February 2024, they abandoned their digital strategy and it was replaced with a new focus on traditional methods of learning. There's a new state subsidy for purchasing physical resources. They've introduced new grants targeting preschool and all sort of state schools and equivalent. They can be used to purchase textbooks and guides. And they've also, in November, they voted in favor of a new bill to strengthen school libraries, to ensure that by July of this year, all pupils should have access to staffed school libraries. And they think that the basic skills, like their core skills, what we would call, our government refers to as foundational knowledge, were best acquired through analog activities in analog environments. And so they've used the scientific evidence that they've got, and they have made the decision to prioritize that and to put their money for education into that. So yes, budgets are difficult, but if the government truly believes in doing the best for their children's education and the positive impact that that has on a whole country's future, essentially, which is, I guess, how I feel. We need to invest in our children and we're investing in our country, I suppose. They've made the decision that we will find the budget because that's the right thing to do. So
Wow.
there you go, the case for books.
Mic drop. Mic drop. I mean, but does that also then kind of bring a wider point of, isn't an element of this out of our control? Because at the end of the day, whatever the government decides is their focus and their direction is where we're going to go. So like you said there, the government made that decision to put
Yes.
money in printed and that, but our government, as one of you said earlier, is putting money into digital literacy and actually teaching children to use digitized resources more, and that's where the money's going. So shouldn't we just get on board, Emma? Shouldn't we just ride with it?
I will just caveat that by saying it was an interim report that was released by the government on the curriculum review. They might hear what I've just said about Sweden and do an
Change the
about
world.
turn,
Change
Shána,
the
I
world.
should imagine. So yeah, stay tuned for their
I love that.
update after listening to this podcast.
This is it. I mean, crikey, we've gone through it, haven't we, guys? I'm really, I'm stuck here. I'm not sure if we can come to a conclusion. How are we going to finish this, guys? Do screens ruin reading, or what's the vibe?
May I refer to the suggestion from someone brilliant called Marianne Wolf to help us out if we can't?
Let's do it.
She used a little phrase called the biliterate brain. She said that literacy literally changes our brain. The process of learning to read changes our brain, but so does what we read, how we read, and on what we read. Developing a biliterate brain, one adapted to both digital and traditional print literacy, has never been more important.
Wow.
I think she says it better than I could.
I can't beat that. I think
Thank
she
you,
summed it up.
Marianne.
So the conclusion is there's no conclusion. There are pros and cons to all.
I think bear in mind the learner and the reader and their preference and the way they interact with books, the environment and situation, and always bear in mind that both are equally important. And that's how where I think I'd come on this.
Yeah, and I'd also just, I guess, go back to what you were just saying, Shána, about working with the system that you're in and what's available to you. At the moment, this is the situation that we're in. We're not, well, unless you are listening in Sweden. Hello from the UK to Sweden, but most of us probably are listening in the UK, and this is the situation we're in. Use what you have available to you, and at the moment, probably the way for you to provide the most books to the most children is absolutely to embrace digital, but fight for those budgets for printed books where you can.
I love this. Thank you. This has been most delightful. And I know I've said this on another podcast before about interviewing Twinkle employees about these kind of subjects. What gives me so much hope is that you guys lead in the digital ebooks, in the originals printed books. You are aware of these struggles that our educators have, and you build that into the products that Twinkle have. Like, I don't want to plug it, but I'm going to plug it. Like, the way the books are designed, with all of that in mind, the benefits of books and the impact of digital, Pete. Like, you've not just thought about, oh, it's just a screen. It's how children interact with that screen to still get those reading skills. And it just gives me so much joy that you've thought about this and that we've really got amazing printed books and digital apps to support educators and children read. I am a big fan of your work, guys. Big fan.
Yeah, we can all agree we want children to read. I know, obviously me and Pete were really battling it out here. We don't get on at all. No, we're
We
fantastic
actually
friends
both
and
agree
colleagues.
completely on everything.
We want you to just use all of our things, please.
Yeah, I love it. And we'll put all the links to everything that you do in our bio. But this has been so fun. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having us, Shána.
Thanks for having us.
Lovely. Thank you so much to Emma and Pete for that very interesting discussion. What are your thoughts? Have you changed your mind since hearing this episode, or do you still have a firm stance either way? We would love to hear what your thoughts are on digital books and physical books and the pros and cons of both. You know where to find us. Do check the podcast description for our social media links so you can get in touch and tell us what you think. And also check the episode description as well to find more information on our digital app. Go give it a try. It's really good. And go check out our physical storybooks that you can actually order for your classrooms and settings. I've got quite the library of Twinkle originals myself, and I love them. So thank you so much for listening today. And until next time, have a great day. So that's it for today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. If you would like to join in or would like to know more, then come and find us on our social media sites. We have a Facebook page, Facebook groups, an Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. All the links of where to find us will be in our podcast description. Come and join the conversation. And whatever you're doing today, I hope you have a great day.